Hey everyone, this is John DeRelay with Wheelhouse, and I'm here with Doug Truitt. We're really pleased to be talking to you. I don't know if anyone remembers, but back around COVID, Doug and I used to talk on a podcast called Rev Bytes. We talked about revenue management and distribution, kind of nitty-gritty concepts. And a lot of stuff has been happening after the really good last couple of years in the industry, and we thought it would be a good time to kind of bring these conversations back and talk to you all about what we're thinking is going on in revenue management, and hopefully to be able to grow what we're talking about as time goes on based on what you guys are interested in, maybe bring on some additional guests, talk about concepts, that kind of thing. Why don't we just start with a little introductions if you either don't remember us well or are new to hearing from us. Doug, why don't you start?
Yeah. Hey everybody, glad to be back. This is fun to kind of get the gang back together again. Had so much fun talking about various topics in the space over the years in the past, and it's glad to be back. But my name is Doug Truitt. I'm the head of commercial at Romy. We're a vacation rental company, kind of more multi-unit condo hotel, big brand type of company operating out of Miami and New Orleans. But I've been a veteran in the vacation rental space for last 8-9 years, ranging from different companies like Stay Alfred that fell at COVID, and then also with Rentals United and Evolve Vacation Rentals, and kind of in that space. Love data, love the space, distribution, revenue management. It's just it's a fun and exciting place, even in the volatile times that we've seen the last several years. So I'm excited to be doing this again and looking forward to many more.
Awesome. And my name is John DeRelay. Been in the vacation rental revenue management space for about a decade now. Had the opportunity to really get my chops with Doug at Stay Alfred. So we're pretty stoked to have these conversations. It's kind of like us being in the office again, just being like, did you see that article?
Yeah, it is.
Since then, though, I've worked as an independent consultant on revenue management projects with both traditional VR and urban kind of models all over the place. And for the last 3 years, I've been working with Wheelhouse as their head of revenue management, helping people implement the solution, talk about revenue strategy, kind of up their game and train their team, and also doing some product design because, there's been a lot of cool movement in revenue management and distribution over the past 10 years, particularly, and I am super stoked to contribute to it. So really excited to be chatting with you guys. The format we're going to kind of take right now is pretty light format compared to our previously pretty in-depth, heavy conversations. We figured that we would, we've been sharing a lot of articles between each other that we see in the space. We try to stay pretty plugged into what's going on and have these conversations so that we can share these with other people we're talking to as well. And we've selected 4 news articles that have come out in the last month, about the last month, that we thought would be pretty interesting to talk about. These are articles about revenue management trends, about industry revenue trends, distribution, and some other things. And we just wanted to have a conversation about some of those things, talk about our perspectives on them, and hopefully get feedback from anyone who's listening. So let me share my screen here just so we can pull up these articles. I don't have any fancy podcast technology yet, but maybe if you guys all like us enough, we'll invest in some. But the first article that we were going to talk about today, I don't think I talked to Doug about the order we were going to do these, Doug, but I don't know if anyone saw this article from Key Data. It's titled US May Overview 2023. Occupancy is down, but net reservations are on the rise. And this is I think a pretty good article. If anyone isn't following Key Data's blog or their webinars, they do a really good job of providing macro data for in our space, from the revenue side. And they do a lot of synopsis, which are really, really interesting. Definitely worth a read, and we'll link all of these articles when we host the recording. But this one I thought would be a good one because, we just came out of June. They haven't put out their June one yet. But the May one gives some pretty interesting, trends that I think we're all kind of feeling and that we can all kind of talk about. So
yeah, I think they usually post them it's usually within 2 weeks after the month closes, I think is usually when they get them out.
Yeah, I would expect June would probably come out pretty soon. And what's pretty cool about this article is they not only show these like great aggregates kind of month over month and year over year, so you can see how things are trending across, mostly the United States in these, but they do a number of breakdowns as well for regional stuff. So you can really get an idea of just at a glance what's going on. It's great kind of visualizations to share with owners just to tell people what's going on, stuff like that. And then they have some pretty good just thoughts at the bottom about what's happening. So Doug, when you read this article, was there anything that really stuck out to you that might be really helpful or interesting, especially since you have portfolios in one of these regions?
Yeah. I think specifically for me, one, I can't say enough echoing what you said about Key Data's approach to this. One, I really like it from actively practicing revenue management, distribution, marketing, and sales in the space, because of the fact that it's very consistent from month to month. It's very similar, same context, right? They go through these same types of charts year over years, looking at multiple year comparisons, looking at revenue, ADR, and occupancy within specific regions of the US to try and draw out some correlations. And then they throw in those nice little tidbits right at the last part of it, which is kind of things to look out for, like which we'll get into a couple of them on here that I really liked. But I think for me, the biggest thing on this article specifically that really helped is it kind of started to really solidify the kind of unspoken macro kind of revenue situation happening in the travel space, specifically, I think more in the short-term rental too, which is just, ADRs are down, occupancies are down, RevPARs are down, but the ADRs aren't as down as much as the other pieces. And I think it's signaling to me that there is a battle going on, I think, which is we've got price sensitivity in the economy with people traveling. I think there's a lot more resistance or a lot more careful thought about making their bookings and what they're doing. But then I think there's a piece that's battling against that, which is property managers and folks in the space that are kind of clinging on to higher rates that they've seen over the last 2 years, which I think is kind of hurting some things. They're giving up occupancy to try and maintain their ADRs, and I think it's really kind of hurting in so many ways to do that. So that was kind of my big takeaway from this one, is just really kind of seeing it kind of materialize over the last 4 or 5 months, really, that this macro situation is starting to come about. So I really did enjoy seeing it kind of come that way, not in a way of like happiness, because it's obviously it sucks and it's not a fun thing for a lot of people to experience right now, but it does help to solidify and at least maybe give a clarity for people to make a path forward.
Totally. I really noticed the same thing as you, Doug. That's what really stuck out to me, is the relationship between occupancy and ADR. If we look at this chart here, where they show the kind of monthly occupancies for really all the last 4 years, occupancy is almost at its lowest point for May as it has been in the last 4 years, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting too, because just the knowledge that occupancy is down in aggregate is pretty important.
Yes.
Because when we look at the beginning of the year, we're maybe down 2021, but it's kind of hovering around the previous year. Whereas once we hit about March, it's like consistently down below the last 2 years. So it's like unequivocal that things are down. But when we look at the ADR line, which they have just a little bit lower, that difference is not as pronounced. Like where occupancy is like almost at the bottom, almost to 2019, 2020, which we were on the upshift from COVID. The ADR line really hasn't come down that much. It's only come down a little bit from last year, and that line really only started to trade a couple months ago. So you kind of have this, like Doug said, people are still holding on to their rates. But the ramifications of that are a significant potential hit to RevPAR, because what we're seeing is that people are just not booking as much as they used to, and they don't show too much forward looking, but I do see on the revenue, the Wheelhouse side, looking at a lot of pricing and a lot of properties, a lot of pricing is still very high in a number of portfolios. And I think we'll cover this on another article, but particularly less professional hosts that have entered the market are often, don't know how to price in this kind of down environment, are holding prices really high. And in areas where there's really high supply, you might find that the competitive price for your comp set is not actually competitive to the consumer. Yeah.
I think one other compounding component that is interesting to think about with supply growth too is like, the hotels are actually kind of starting to wake up, so to speak, out of their, what I've kind of calling their COVID coma. It was a lot harder for the hotels to rebound as much as vacation rentals due to the nature of what COVID was and what it did to travel in that way. And so I think it did leave a lot of folks in a place of like comfort and thinking this is the way it's going to be. We're doing great. Everything's amazing. And then the hotels have finally regained and rebounded, and now are taking a lot more of that, bigger travel accommodation share that does make it a little bit more competitive and harder for people to pick up.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting to me that you mentioned that, because I did see an article from Smith Travel Research about we'll kind of cover a little bit at the end, but it was about the Super Bowl, and it was about the Phoenix area, which, if we look at this key data, Phoenix is really getting reamed in terms of its RevPAR change year over year. We've heard stories of like massive supply growth. I'm sure a bunch of you heard stories that like Super Bowl really didn't sell out. But when you read the hotel data, they don't have that storyline. The hotel data had a killer, highly occupied, high rate season. And that disjunct is really interesting. And I think, it has a lot of these things that we mentioned earlier, which is there's a lot of new hosts, there's a lot of new inventory, and there's a lot of people who are holding on to their pricing. And it kind of really shows that if you hold that pricing too high and aren't paying attention to the market, even if, you run the risk of just not getting the occupancy, because generally we take share from the hotels, but in this case, we were probably just pricing too high, and people didn't drop it early enough, and then it just didn't, potentially didn't materialize. I mean, the story of having vacancy around Super Bowl is really a surprising one in my mind. It shows really a missed opportunity from a pricing strategy perspective. They really shouldn't be sold out, and those events are particularly hard to price because you really don't know. But yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of thing there that Doug mentions with the hotels kind of coming up. We can see a little bit of that different story. It's not like we're just working in lockstep here. Anything else in this article that really stuck out to you, Doug?
Really, to me, the last pieces that stuck out to me was really that final piece, which I really recommend people considering it and think about it, because it helps your perspective. So if you go all the way down there, really, like, there was two main points that they talked about, which is Americans being excited to travel but kind of hesitant to pay the prices, the high prices. So I think that, and then the sticker shock impacting travel plans. I mean, I think what I like about this is Key Data actually goes out and gets some relevant survey data. It may not be a ginormous, pooling of the survey or whatever, but at least it's some kind of sentiment or understanding of what some people are thinking about when it comes to travel. And I just think of this in the way that, like, right there it says, concerns regarding finances and travel costs have seen an uptick in the past month as a deterrent to travel. And 47% of those surveyed agreed that high travel prices have kept them from traveling. And only 28% of the respondents believe that right now is a good time to travel. So again, going back to one of the points I made, which is the price sensitivity, people are being more thoughtful about their spending. I think all that pent up demand and resources they had from COVID, where they kind of froze all their spending, didn't travel, was like, I don't know if I'm going to lose my job. I don't know if I'm going to get, things are going to happen in the space. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to protect all that nest egg of money and keep saving and whatever. They then pent up that demand over the last 2 years and utilized a lot of that money. And now it's getting back to a place of like, oh, I really need to be thoughtful. I'm not going to pay $500 a night in the shoulder season for something where, maybe I should shop around more, I spend more time. I'd love to see an article or some data around like the amount of time a potential traveler is spending searching for accommodations versus maybe, or planning trips maybe now versus the last 2 years, because that might be a good indication of like, wow, people are willing to spend more time to find a better price and really get into it, other than saying, I just need to get away and go somewhere. I want to have a fun time. So that's one. And then also the sticker shock piece was very interesting as well. I really like these two parts of this article. Just really helps put that responsibility on property managers and hosts to really be cognizant of the actual pricing and the sticker shock of all the compounding pieces that go into the taxes, the fees, the different cleaning fees, all those other components. And that would be one of the advice I would give too, is like really take a look at that stuff and see if you're just holding too tightly to a lot of those pieces, and maybe you should, think about adjusting it.
Totally. There were two things that kind of stuck out at the end of the article that I think were pretty interesting. One is like the title itself, which is like net reservations are up. So sometimes I hear people reference them and they're like, I'm saying like, well, demand is down, and they'll go like, well, yeah, net reservations are up. And that's can definitely be true. Like demand is still growing, but we actually have to consider supply now, right? Like, and it's not going to be the same in every market, right? This is aggregate across the country. Some markets don't have the huge supply growth and definitely have a different situation. But if you're in a market that has massive supply, Orlando, Phoenix, Scottsdale, that kind of stuff, you probably are definitely feeling this, where even though we know demand in aggregate is up, there's also just, it's being diluted in how it gets to the PMs. That revenue is being diluted.
Absolutely.
And just like you said, Doug, this bottom I think is really fascinating. I think Key Data does such a fantastic job of linking macro trends to the data specific to our industry. And I think that's so important because, when you're having conversations with owners who maybe don't understand the ins and outs of revenue in vacation rentals, despite owning one, they are aware of the macro trends. So you can use these macro trends to link the more specific data that you need to talk about in relation to their properties or your company to the sentiment that they already have, right? Because these are going to make sense. If you talk to any of your owners about surveys about how people are making pricing or buying decisions, that's going to resonate with them because they're probably going through the same thing. The other thing too, I think, around this sticker shock portion is when we know probably pricing is too high. Doug and I are working in this space. We know people are holding pricing too high in our space. And that goes back to that idea of the comp sets may not be very well optimized. You may be in line with your comp set, but they may not actually be optimized to the consumer. I think what's most important here, though, is this portion, which is we have to keep in mind that it's not just our pricing that's high. It's that airlines are high.
Yes. Gas
is high. And we're the end of the chain. Very few people book their hotel before they book their travel. And so that's going to compound how sensitive people are to the pricing. Is if the way that they get to you is too expensive, then it's going to change their budget considerations. The final thing too, I think that goes into this is we know that people want to travel still. Like consumer sentiment about traveling is still high, but they're not as willing to pay as much. So what that means, and I think I saw this a lot this winter in kind of like tertiary ski markets, which after COVID were slammed. This year, when people had the choice or rates were too high in the place they maybe would have gone, they chose to go somewhere else. So they may still choose to travel, but rather than going to the lake house or the ski cabin that they go to every year, they may consider going to a new place or going at a different time of the year to still have that trip, but it's not necessarily going to show up in your portfolio, especially if you're not pricing for the consumer.
Yeah. And I mean, to that point specifically in the second part of the sticker shock, it said over 60% of those that experienced sticker shock said it caused them to reconsider going to the destination they had their sights on. And 26% said they chose to visit a less expensive destination. I mean, that's just like literally that. I mean, to echo what you just said, that tells me that the intent to travel is super high. meaning that means that people are so determined to travel that they will literally change what they had in their mind of an impression of something that caught them on Instagram or whatever it was, that I got to go to this place. They look at it and go, oh, it's way too expensive. I can't do that. Well, let's go find somewhere else. Literally, it's almost like an addiction kind of type thing that happened where it was like, I got to go somewhere and now I'm going to find another place. So it's like, it's just crazy that I think the conversion potential is great if you can really dial in, alignment with those potential travelers on the right and keeping that sticker shock down.
100%. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like there's the negative aspect, which you may not be able to get the rates that you budgeted for, or people may actually not be returning to your market this year who traditionally would have. But it goes the other way too. If you're priced well for the consumer and you're really clued into what you're doing, either by segmenting your portfolio to be able to give some stuff up, you can also potentially capture those travelers because you know that the OTAs are incentivized to show you if you're a good deal. There are people looking in these different booking windows. That was the biggest thing I think that was really interesting here too, is the booking window average has not really changed that much. And it's pretty long also.
Yeah.
So, I hear a lot of people talk about how the booking window is just getting shorter. The booking window is getting shorter. And I think that's true, but I also encourage people to question if they're manufacturing it through their pricing strategy. It might be that people are looking at the same time, but they're just not willing to pay what you want them to.
Yeah.
And the earlier you come to terms with that, the more effective you'll be able to be in optimizing your portfolio.
Well, I mean, average booking window obviously is a byproduct of what we're putting into it. We're artificially changing the booking window by holding on to our ADRs, honestly. I mean, it could be in a lot of ways.
Awesome. Well, why don't we move on to another one? I think it's the next article we have for you is pretty good, especially considering some of these macro trends that Key Data points out for us. Doug brought a really interesting article that was in CNN in mid-June. Oh, actually, I have it right here. And this one I think is really interesting. This one's not directly about vacation rental data, but it is really about these kind of macro spending situations. And it's titled Gen Z and Millennials are scrimping while boomers are living it up, right? So pretty interesting, Doug. You shared this one with me, so I'd love to hear what kind of caught your eye.
What caught my eye in this was just kind of looking at the other part of the funnel of somebody converting and deciding to travel and do it, which is just like life in general from people's own, personal incomes and different demographics of folks who are traveling. I think it was interesting to see that, there was some increases to Social Security in monthly payments for folks who are on Social Security. So like you are able to get, bigger deposits. I don't think if you scroll down, I think it was only like an extra, was it like an extra 125 a month or something like that? It was some kind of change that basically made the, boomers and stuff like that being like, oh, sweet, you know what? I'm going to go travel, more likely to travel. I thought that was interesting. And then for what, a lot of companies that are targeting thinking like Gen Z, millennials and stuff that are doing tons of travel, nomadic traveling, I can work from anywhere, all that kind of aspect. There are some components that I didn't really realize or think about that were relevant, but like, things like the debt loan forgiveness on student debt and stuff, that's expiring in August. And it's causing people to think differently about their transactions. And I think the biggest point I like about this article is it actually you partnered with Bank of America to look at actually like credit card or purchasing transactions as it's happening, and to see those changes in the increase and decrease in spending really is kind of like those little tiny triggers or identifiers, to me, that says people are being very vigilant and watchful over their spending. And one might even argue, even though that the Social Security payouts are a little bit bigger, that kind of thing, they're still watching what they're spending. Maybe their intent to travel is more, but they're still watching what they're spending on their travel. So back to that other article of like, hey, there's a lot of intent to travel, but people are willing to move the destination they're willing to travel because of the price. So I thought those are the main kind of interesting pieces for me in this article. Obviously, again, like you said, it's not specific to vacation rental or to all of the travel in general, but it does cite a couple of things in there of likeliness to travel from folks. But it really feeds what, you know, we are all going through day to day in our own personal lives of managing our own personal finances and stuff, and how those transactions trending are changing by demographics.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating for those same reasons that you point out. The article points out that for the older generation, spending has actually increased, whereas for younger generations, it's decreased. And then they point out a little later that older travelers, older consumers are spending their transactions on travel, whereas younger people are having to reroute their spending to their housing costs. So they're already getting squeezed. So prices are higher. The limited money that they do have, that discretionary income, is also being squeezed. They do point out too that student debt payment is coming back. And, you know, student debt's an interesting thing because millennials now are probably one of the big family spending demographics, right? And millennials, only 13% of Americans have student loan debt, but 38% of millennials do. So we're taking this demographic of both young people who traditionally would use discretionary income to travel. We also take the primary age group for families now, and you have two significant things that are going to limit their discretionary spending. The higher housing costs, which is already eating into their spending habits, and the upcoming repayment of their debt, which has been frozen for 2 years, right? That's a macro trend that you really have to consider if you're in a market where you're really marketing to families, particularly middle income families who are coming for a regular vacation. Those people aren't going to be able to afford it necessarily. Same is if you're particularly marketing towards young people. I know you have a lot of properties in Miami, Doug.
Yeah.
College spring break is a squeezed market, right?
Yes.
Or early 20s, mid 20s kind of partying. Those people aren't necessarily going to have the same spending power that they've had the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
And that's going to impact, who you're doing. The other end of the coin too is that if you have a product that's really good for older travelers, really orienting your marketing and what you're doing to be able to service them, particularly on the high end, I think is going to be really important, because those are going to be the people who are most willing to pay the rate premiums that you may be pushing for.
Agreed.
So pretty interesting. We'll link this one. It gives us some good kind of, macro data. And you can kind of think about how it might affect your buying group, your consumer group that you're marketing to. And we'll kind of see how that goes, right? It is, I think, just super interesting that they're noting in transactions that the older consumers are spending on travel.
Yeah, and one might want to think on this too, is like with everything you just said, that put in perspective for me a little bit too, John, is that like group travel might be on the rise because of this. Because if you think about it, if things are squeezed and things are tight, but the intent is still there for the traveler to go somewhere, but say these, millennials or whoever are getting kind of squeezed on their finances, and housing increases and not being able to pay back on, student debt, or trying to consider that, might be more likely to say, hey, a couple of families, let's get together and squeeze as much as we can into a group thing and still be able to go travel and save some money on doing it. So it might even be an idea to target as well.
Yeah, and I just really think that, there tends to be for some reason people still think of millennials as really young, right? Like the millennial cohort is solidly in their 30s, and I think the oldest are in their early 40s now. Like, we're not talking about Gen Z, superfluously spending money. When we talk about millennials not buying your product, you're talking about people who have kids in elementary school, who have families, who are probably at the peak of their earnings, and they're still carrying a substantial amount of debt. Like I said, 38% of millennials have college debt, and among 35-year-olds, which are solidly pretty much in the middle of being a millennial now, the average outstanding student loan debt is still over $42,000. So we're talking about a significant chunk of money that is directly being removed from discretionary spending, and those people aren't going to not buy clothes or school supplies for their kids.
Right.
They're not going to not pay for their housing. They're going to not go on vacation.
Yep.
Awesome. So any other things you want to comment on this one, Doug?
No, I just would challenge everybody when you're looking for resources, information, just think a little differently with it. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly called out for travel or vacation rental. It could be something as simple as understanding the economics of transactions and banking that people are doing that might influence the behavior.
100%. And like we said before, just being able to link this information to what you're talking about. You know, if you know in your marketing data that you primarily sell to people ages 28 to 40, you can tell your owners, look, this is the debt burden that these people are under, where we expect that there's going to be less demand from this group. There's going to be less ability to pay year-over-year rate premiums.
Definitely.
I think those ages really put it in perspective. For some reason, when I talk to people, they still think of millennials. It's like, oh, the 23-year-old millennials. It's like, no, millennials are in their 30s.
I know. I'm
We're all adults now.
43, and I'm probably on the peak side of the millennial.
Yeah. All right. Well, this next article I think was really interesting. This was trending last week.
Yeah.
On Newsweek, you know, it's a pretty big article. I had a bunch of people reach out to me about this. I had even one, my buddy Zach at Black Swan. He was like, John, you need to comment on this so I can send it to other people. But this article is titled Fall in Airbnb Listing Revenues Sparks Housing Market Crash Fears. And it's a pretty interesting one. I mean, it's a pretty doom and gloom article. Essentially, they are talking about this report that was put out by All the Rooms, which All the Rooms is a pretty reputable data company, but they traditionally focus on hotels. So that's going to give us one kind of thing. And essentially what they did is they were looking at year-over-year Airbnb revenues, and they were dividing them by the number of active or the number of listings. They don't really define what that denominator is. And basically they went market by market and said, you know, look at how low the revenue per listing is in a number of these markets. You know, some of them getting up to, you know, almost minus 50% year-over-year revenues in markets like Cedarville, Gatlinburg area, Phoenix, Austin, that kind of thing. And this really sparked a big panic, particularly from real estate folks and, you know, all of the people who've been saying the Airbnb bust is here, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, we're in the industry, and I think that there's some things that we can talk about here that, you know, we definitely know the markets are down, but these numbers seem really egregious, right?
Yeah, like really egregious.
Yeah. And we know, like, you know, they actually do quote AirDNA in here, and AirDNA is, I'm not sure exactly where it is, but they basically say, like, that doesn't seem right to us. We're seeing it down 3%. 3% seems a little optimistic to me. You know, we looked at Key Data's data, it's 10 to 15. Wheelhouse data tends to consistently be around 10 to 15% at these aggregates. So we know the markets are down, but they're not down 50%. So what do you think is going on? Why, like, I don't think All the Rooms is like lying to us or is wrong. You know, they're a pretty good company, but what do you think is actually going on here, Doug?
You know, honestly, is there a constraint? Is there issues? Yeah, of course there is. I feel like I don't necessarily think that they're lying, but you know, data can always be portrayed in any way and narrative that you want it to go. Honestly, if you dice it down and get it to the way you want it, if you have an agenda. So I don't know if their agenda is aligned to try and go at Airbnb or signal something or whatever. Clearly, they got a rise out of everybody with this because it was all over everywhere. But I think there's shreds of truth in all of it. Honestly, I tend to probably think a little bit more aligned with you, John, on, you know, Wheelhouse and Key Data being, you know, 10 to 15% down probably is feels a little bit more accurate and right based on just the macro of situations going on. But granted, there could be isolated specific places like they're calling out here that maybe are higher than 10 to 15%. Maybe it's like 20, maybe 25, but it does feel really, these are the types of things when I look at lots of data and look at things, I'm like, you tilt your head and you're like, that just doesn't seem right. Like that feels like there'd be more signals, there'd be more PR, there'd be something from Airbnb, or there'd be something going on to combat it, because it would be like a really bad negative thing. So I tend to think a little bit more like that this is not quite portraying a global positioning on each of these markets, but it's got to be something in the filter of what they chose to put into it. Maybe it's only 3 bedrooms to 5 bedrooms, or it's, you know, outskirt of the suburb of this zip code, or they eliminated some zip codes or something, and it just, you know, came out that way. But it just seems very suspect, I guess.
Yeah, I I think it comes down to just a couple things. One is this metric of RevPal that they've utilized for available
Hmm.
listing. And I think that's kind of an interesting metric because, you know, we all work in Airbnb. We know that there's a lot of listings that are non-producing listings or that are hyper available. We don't really know if they're, you know, rolling this up from the daily basis and removing blocked nights. They're not dividing this
Right.
by the number of nights available. They're just by the number of listings. And we all know there's a lot of listings that aren't really active. So that's one thing. We also know there's a lot of, it's really easy to have listing growth, right?
Yep.
The other element I think that's really important for us that is just obvious to us is they're just looking at Airbnb, but professional operators distribute across multiple channels.
Mm-hmm.
So just because that revenue isn't appearing on Airbnb listings doesn't mean that revenue
Share shift hasn't
in
gone
the
somewhere
market.
else. Yeah.
We've all been making a lot of efforts for direct booking. We know that we have other channels. VRBO is consistently a strong channel in a number of places, and that full picture just isn't captured by looking at a single channel. And you actually can't infer the market's position because of one channel, because no one has dominant market share, right? And so those two things combined, I think, really, it's not that the data is untrue, it's just that it's not actually that useful. You need a more holistic vision, which is why there's companies in our space like the pricing companies, Wheelhouse, Price Labs, Beyond, the data companies, Key Data, AirDNA, Transparent, that try to put all this data together to give us the best indication of what's going on in the market. I do think what's really funny though is the response to this has been massive.
Yeah,
and
huge.
It just kind of like shows me like that real estate people still don't really understand the industry. You know, like real estate agents, which is partly why there's so much oversupply, right? People were given projections by real estate agents, not necessarily by companies, about their performance. And, you know, there's a lot of people that I think are underwater. And there's a quote at the bottom here that I think is actually very true based off of this. It is, let's see here, doodly-doo. It says, I think newbie Airbnb owners who bought over the last 1 to 2 years with a mortgage are in trouble, Gurley wrote. They got in at a high price, have a high monthly payment, and little margin for error. They could be some of the first to sell later in 2023 when the season ends. I think that is 100% true.
Yep.
Even knowing that the market's not down 50%. One thing I've noticed in Wheelhouse data quite often is that the top performing listings, the difference between the top performing listings and the bottom performing listings in the market is substantial. So the market may be down 15%, but what that looks like in markets is your highest performing listings may only be down a couple percent, if at all, and the lowest performing listings are like down substantially and have tons of vacancy. Right? And you have a lot of these people who maybe aren't reacting to pricing, who are new and don't understand what it's like to price, how volatile the pricing has been, because it's been honestly kind of easy the last couple of years. And those are the ones who are in the most trouble. And I think what that indicates is, you know, if you have a supply issue in your market, that might correct itself within 2 years, right? Yeah. It may mean some turn in your portfolio, and you probably have to identify those owners who really are in a position that is untenable, and you may be in a position to actually like allocate your resources away from them. If they're not in a position to be solvent, then why should you allow your team to spend a bunch of resources on them, because you're not going to be able to make them happy. But there's some thinking you can do there in terms of like cohorting out your actual portfolio of owners and figuring out, you know, who are the people who's are reasonable, who are in a position to make it through kind of a down market and be potential long-term partner, who is just going to turn no matter what you do, and who is going to, you know, among your competitors, who is also going to have people who are going to be looking for new opportunities because they, you know, they just need to. And also, you know, we know that there will be new buyers eventually too. Once housing prices settle down a little, new people will come in, and that's also an opportunity for portfolio growth.
Yeah, I would I would add one thought that I had with this too, which is, just as we were talking about earlier with regards to like pent up demand, and when COVID hit, people were kind of, consolidating their money, and they were saving things, and they were like kind of not knowing what what was going to happen. Well, when the housing started getting really good for valuation of your homes, there was a lot of people that were either refinancing and trying to like remodel their house, or taking some of those proceeds and actually dropping down, getting their second home purchase, meaning first time that they decide that they've went and said, I have my one home, I'm going to get a second home. And you know what? I'm going to make some money on this. I'm going to do some of this. So you got these inexperienced folks that have come into the space who don't know it, to your point, John. And it's just like, well, they are at real risk for that now, because maybe they've just been thinking, wow, I'm going to ride the gravy train. And now it's the time for people to like really sharpen their revenue management sword and actually really be smart about saying, what should I be doing here? And they're going to, like you said, they're going to be in really big trouble in so many ways.
Yeah. I've talked to a number of people about, from just the revenue management perspective, 15%, 10 to 15% down in a market it's not a good thing, but it's also not like hospitality is volatile. Anyone who's been in business for 5 years, definitely 10 or more, knows that there's ups and downs. And 10 to 15% is something you can deal with. What you can't also do though is over forecast in these environments, because where the market may only be down 10 or 15%, if you forecasted 15% growth, you're now down 30%. And that's going to cause rippling effects in your business if you've spent according to these targets that aren't being hit. So I think, this goes for the owners too, like really being real about what's going on in the market, trying to find, articles like this or this market data to be able to educate the owners so they can make the best decision possible for themselves as well. It's going to be really important to really stabilizing in a down period, because frankly, even though the markets are down in aggregate, there are plenty of people who are actually doing better year over year or are able to really perform well. But it requires you to switch your thinking, to potentially be more conservative, to put yourself in a position where you can actually overperform rather than consistently being under, even if you are doing well compared to the market.
Definitely.
Awesome. Any last comments, Doug?
No. No.
All right. Well, we've got one more article for you, and this one's kind of a fun one. This one is from Smith Travel Research, who I think his name is Jan Freitag. Is that his name, Doug?
Yes. I didn't actually pay attention to his name.
Double check that. Yeah, Jan Freitag is someone I follow on LinkedIn. He posts tons of great stuff. He's the head of hospitality analytics at CoStar, was previously with STR before they got bought out. And he is a great person to follow. He's consistently posting excellent Smith Travel Research, hospitality news. And this was something I saw him post, or Smith Travel Research post, and I just think it's kind of funny. It's U.S. hotel performance enchanted by Taylor Swift's The Eras Tour. So this is just a breakdown of like the first half of the tour and its effect on RevPAR across all these markets, right?
Really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really cool article. And with any Smith Travel Research article, they have a great blog too. They're going to give you some really good data. Some really good analysis. This one I thought stuck out really interesting. There was $98 million in additional revenue from the Taylor Swift event dates, which is equal to an entire week of room revenue in Los Angeles. So the premium that Taylor Swift brought in the first half of her tour is equivalent to all of Los Angeles's revenue for a week. They also said it's equivalent, the surplus from Taylor Swift is equivalent to what the 5 largest markets combined sell in a single day.
That is insane. It's incredible.
It's insane. There's they did another one that you can find in here about Beyonce. Beyonce and Taylor Swift drive markets. Back at Stay Alfred, we used to have this joke. It was like a joke, but we also did use it. We called it the Taylor Swift constant. And whenever there was an event in a market and we didn't know what its impact was going to be, we'd go on the Google Trends comparison and compare that event to just Taylor Swift. And if that event was being searched as much as Taylor Swift was being searched
it was
on any
worth
given
it.
day knew that we should raise prices preemptively because it was probably going to sell out the market.
T Swizzle coming through.
Yeah, she definitely crushes. I don't know if anyone had properties in Nashville. It's like they're so hard to price because you don't know the dates and they will literally sell out your portfolio before you can even distribute your rates.
Yeah, you can't even mitigate.
Yeah, I mean, if you know that something's being announced, you basically have to go in and block your inventory as soon as the announcement happens and then price it and open it back up. I did notice with a couple clients, like Wheelhouse responded really quickly. And we had a number of people who do really well. But if you have like a top property, like those are the ones always at the risk, right? Because they get booked really fast. And that's like the tricky thing, right? So anything here stick out to you, Doug? That was pretty funny or interesting?
The one thing I thought was interesting is that Sunday night concerts have had the greatest impact on occupancy, rising from 54% to 68.9% on concert nights. Literally got a 15% occupancy lift, like on a Sunday night. That's incredible.
It's incredible. That kind of goes along here with I think it's in the paragraph right before, markets that didn't really have sellouts because there's so much inventory still had substantial
huge
premiums in ADR, which kind of counters this idea that, we've talked about it ever since Airbnb became a thing, is this like ability to flex inventory is mitigating ADR increases. But they mention here in like Philadelphia, Boston, and particularly Dallas, where there's so many hotel rooms, they saw huge ADR lifts despite really only getting to 60-65% market occupancy. And I think what that really points to that's important in our space, because we're so much more distributed than hotels, is your location on these concerts is so important. Because I bet you, if the market occupancy is around, 60-70%, that market isn't selling out. And that means not everyone's getting a rate premium. But the people who are getting a rate premium have a really relevant product to that concert. I'm sure, like, I'm telling people something that people know. If you've got like big football season, if you're on the other side of town, you're probably not getting a premium. But if you're right next to the stadium, you are.
Yeah, if you travel well or whatever. Yeah.
For people pricing, it's important. It probably would have been really important to have that conversation for people at the Super Bowl. It's like, Phoenix is a big metro area. If you're not right next to the stadium, your rate premium isn't gonna be the same.
No.
And I bet you're in Miami. They have that big Formula One race too, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not close to downtown Miami.
Nope. No, it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, there was also, there was a lot of buzz about that event too. Like, that the prices were way too high on not just room rates, but like everything. It's like the whole market reacted in a way that was like, we should get all this. And it was like the F1 fans were not that happy about it. Plus there was a Las Vegas F1 coming up too that people were kind of holding out for as well. But, the funny question I'd have on this one for you, John, is a fun question would be is, how many hotel big brands have probably tried to solicit Taylor Swift to be like a sponsor? And how much money do you think that they would throw at it for an ROI? Like that would be a fun KPI metric to come up with. Like what would it be for like the Taylor Swift metric for hotels on how much they're willing to spend that makes the ROI?
I know I imagine that like some of those big brands could probably like throw a concert in a place where they have a lot of inventory, or like all the hotels come together to put it on. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these like huge concerts, like they actually have to, the markets themselves have to bid to pay the performers because they have such a huge uplift on the market.
Yeah.
You mentioned Las Vegas, in that Formula One. I thought that it's pretty funny here because Las Vegas is like the only one that like didn't have a premium at all, which is super funny, right?
Yeah.
They're just like, yeah, turns out we're not turning away any gamblers people for an ADR premium.
Las Vegas is such a unicorn.
Their revenue managers, I don't know if any of you guys, or if you've talked to any of those casino revenue managers, but man, they are like the top in the business.
Oh,
That
yeah.
is, that thought process is just there. It's like, why would I want to make an extra $100 a night when everyone is worth $4,000 by just being in my hotel?
Yeah, balancing the room rate over the ability, the amount of net that they're going to get off the floor, the gambling floor.
Yeah. I thought this one was pretty interesting. Nashville. Like, look at that. 100% RevPAR premium.
100%.
100%. And I know, 33% occupancy premium is gigantic, because she did like, I think 5 shows there. So we're seeing like huge increases on weekday occupancy.
Oh, yeah.
What's interesting to me too, though, is like a 33% premium, bringing it to 90%. That means that there's also kind of like some lower occupancy in that market. I know that I've talked to some clients in Nashville, and they really are. I think the surrounding areas, surrounding downtown, are really starting to get pummeled a bit by the supply that's in that market.
Yeah.
I don't think that's new. I think it's been happening for a while, but
several years.
Yeah, it's definitely not 2019 in Nashville.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So just a really fascinating article. I think these are kind of fun, and I'm glad they're doing them. They do talk a little bit about Phoenix here. Phoenix is one that really doesn't see a significant premium. What's interesting, though, in the hotel world is that is not because of the problems that we would say in our industry. They actually point out that Phoenix did extraordinarily well. They were just surrounded by such high seasonal performance that it mitigated the premium. And from this hotel perspective, Phoenix is actually really strong. And that, I think, is a big marker for making people review the pricing and ADR strategies we've had in our industry. Because you talk to people in that area here, and they're just like, man, we're just getting butchered in this space. But that is not the news you hear from the hotel world.
Yeah.
They're talking about it being an extremely strong season for them. They're talking about Super Bowl being a record, almost a record Super Bowl. And at the end of the day, we know hotels price more conservatively than people in our industry do. And I think it's becoming extremely evident in that difference here between us and them, right?
Yeah.
They're seeing significantly good performance, whereas we're attritioning, and some of it is probably honestly self-inflicted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting too, like with regards to Phoenix, it's like it was over March 17th, 18th. It's like you got a lot of compounding high demand stuff during that time frame, right? Isn't what's the car show that's during that time frame? There's
Barrett
a couple
Jackson, I think.
Yeah, there's some golf tournaments. There's spring
Waste
training
Management
potentially.
Open.
Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff. So I'm not totally surprised that the lift wasn't as high as Nashville or other ones, because it's like a lot of seasonality piece too, I think.
Yeah, and that's what they say there.
Yeah.
It's just a super strong, it's hard to get a premium over Super Bowl. But
so you're saying Taylor Swift has got nothing on Super Bowl?
No, it's the other way around. The Super Bowl's got nothing on Taylor Swift. They did get a premium.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, Taylor Swift is. Can you imagine if she was doing the performance at a Super Bowl?
Super Bowl, yeah.
Super Swift Bowl.
After these concerts and this buzz that she's gotten on this, what if she was doing did the next Super Bowl?
Yeah, that would be like the biggest ADR event in history, is a Super Bowl with Taylor Swift and Beyonce.
I was gonna say, you got to throw in Beyonce on that too.
And one of those country stars, like I don't know who the big ones are. Do you like country, Doug?
Some country, but like if you put Chris Stapleton on there or something like that.
Yeah. Just be like 1,000% RevPAR premium. All submarkets sold out.
If they released it, you would have the fastest like additions on development for like hotel rooms by developers and hotel brands. Be like, I don't care how much it costs. I need 200 more rooms added to the wing of this property in 2 months.
Yeah. I actually talked to some people in Phoenix that told me about a really interesting trend that you see with these big events. Is there's these companies that'll go to homeowners and say, hey, we'll set yourself up as an Airbnb for the week. They kind of give them some forecasts that they made up, and they charge them like a fixed rate to like set it up and run the turn. But I think it really points to a need to educate the owners better about the data. Because, we go back to this Airbnb one, and this blew up because like real estate agents were crazy. And we go and look back to like 2021, 2022, when all these sales are happening. They're like, go buy this as an Airbnb investment. You'll make all this money. Those people don't know how to estimate revenue in this industry.
No.
And the knock-on effect of that is potentially really detrimental to the homeowner, right?
Yep.
Which also means it's detrimental to the PM, because if you have a homeowner who's just straight underwater on their mortgage, they're cash flow negative, like that's going to be misery for everyone involved.
Yeah. It's kind of a pretty big responsibility that they have for the influence that they generate for people who are listening, especially with all those folks who are just getting into the space over the last couple of years and learning how to do stuff or be willing to do stuff. It's like they're willing to listen and eager, and people paint stuff like this, and it can cause some serious ripples, obviously, because of the attention this got,
Yeah. And I don't know, like, I think that real estate agents are smart, but I just don't think they have really any access to a product which will give them good data. And I wonder in, locations where that there's a lot of like properties, getting bought and sold, if there's a benefit to just building relationships with the actual travel agent places. One, because they can probably make you introductions, but two, like any education they have about how the revenue works is only going to benefit you and them. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a mixed intention for the real estate agent. If you're like, hey, it's a down year, like this is what we expect, and they're like, well, housing prices are here, I need to tell these people that they're going to make 20% margin, like they'll probably do it. But there's definitely a missing piece of education there, which is, owners are being given information about this space that they don't actually understand.
Yeah. And it's also too, I think from the real estate side, it's like, it's not as easy as saying it's your mortgage to revenue ratio. I mean, there's lots of other components that they're just not experienced at realizing how much cost there is, maintenance and breaking of things and liabilities and parties and smoking, like all those variables that really just erode your bottom line too. So like when they go and blanket say things like, oh, 20%, whatever, it's like, really, it's not. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 5, because of the fact of all the other pieces, the housekeeping, the maintenance, the cleanliness, like all of those things. Like there's a lot to it.
100%. 100%. Well, Doug, we've been chatting for, I think, about 45 minutes now. It seems pretty solid conversation. I hope everyone found it interesting. We'll post these articles when we put this up so that you guys can access them yourselves. And then, we'll kind of continue to do this on a monthly basis and just talk about some of the interesting news that we're seeing. Hopefully we'll be able to kind of follow on with, like Key Data doing their monthly stuff. We can talk about those trends. And if you guys see anything that's really interesting, let us know.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. It's been great. We're back.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.